Alright, so today we are going to talk about choosing and incorporating evidence into your writing. So let's go ahead and start, right? So when we are choosing evidence, the first thing I want to point out, there are other types of evidence than just quotes in it. Right, you can talk about things that happen in details. You don't necessarily have to quote it, you just have to refer to it. The people are familiar with the passage, so you can talk about something that happens without actually having to put that in quotation marks and use that exactly from it. You do, however, need to definitely quote. Secondly, you need to make sure your evidence is relevant to your quote. And I've certainly seen people use quotes just kind of to get those quotes in there, and it's not really about the claim that they're making. You need to make sure that it's relevant to your claim. So how do you do that? Well, what in the text leads you to your insight? That's probably something to use as evidence. If you saw it there and it made you think, this guy is blah, 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 then, go ahead and that's something to use for evidence. So how much is enough? Ms. Barber in her video suggests at least 2 pieces of evidence per insight. So you can pretty much think of that as 2 pieces of evidence per body paragraph. And that's probably enough. Can you do more than that? Absolutely. In the video, she said this is an instance where more is more. The more you kind of dive deep and analyze, the more the AP readers are able to give you credit for. Of course, you have to balance that with the amount of time you have. So anyway, it's different than 2 quotes, right? 2 pieces of evidence and 2 quotes are not the same thing, and you'll see that in my example later. You might find that, I use a lot of quotes, but I might use 2 or 3 different quotes in order to kind of talk about one element, or one piece of evidence. So, your mileage may vary. All right, so in quoting, for the 1000th time, embed your quotes. I'm not a fan of hard and fast rules, but Barbara, again in that video, says that she tells her students to use no more than 9 words in a quote, and I think I'm okay with that. You may find it needs to be done in 10, right? So that's okay, but the point is, you're not quoting a whole sentence. You're not quoting, it's your words that need to make sense. The quote just kind of adds to it. Never use a quote on its own. You shouldn't have a whole sentence that's a quote. Ms. Barber calls this like a naked quote. A little too risque for me, but you get the idea. So there is no need for line numbers here. I know that we normally cite things, but the readers don't expect you to put line numbers, so don't take the time to figure it out, because that given the task is kind of wasted time. So you don't need to put line numbers. And finally, just because this is who I am, Ms. Barber uses the sprinkle analogy with ice cream, right? That quotes should be like sprinkles and sprinkled all over your ice cream. And I object to that wholeheartedly. First off, because sprinkles are not really good. They take ice cream and just add a little bit of sugar to it. It doesn't really need sugar. And also, they only go on top, right? So here you have your ice cream cone. You put sprinkles on it. It's just on the outside. I don't mind the ice cream analogy, but let's look at it this way. Alright, so let's say you've got ice cream. You know what makes vanilla ice cream better? Oreos. This is, just sprinkled on top. Maybe the cookie on top, right? Sprinkled around. You see the little crumbs there. That's not as good as this. Cookies and cream ice cream, they're all throughout. It's not you are sprinkling these on to make it look nice. It's not you're sprinkling these on to add just a little something to the top. Your quotes should be mixed all throughout. And cookies and cream ice cream is one of the best ice creams. So there we go. Okay, so let's look at an example. Recall from the prompt a little while ago, 2 videos ago, I think I wrote this thesis. In the excerpt, the narrator, overwhelmed by the setting and circumstances of which he meets with Zenobia, struggles to separate his scorn for the image she presents and the true character that he believes lies beneath her act, right? And I put an outline together. Okay. The first point, and you'll notice these aren't really full sentences. That's because when you're writing this essay and you're taking notes and maybe putting an outline together, you're not taking the time to do full sentences, right? So he's overwhelmed with the opulence. This image leads to scorn. He questions who she is, and he's convinced that it's an act. Okay, so I wrote a body paragraph. And I did it based off that first one, that he's overwhelmed by the opulence. Excuse me for a moment. Okay. So, as the passage opens, the narrator is bewildered by Zenobia's presence. While certainly the opulence and brilliancy of the setting with which Zenobia has chosen to surround herself is impressive, he is overwhelmed by the stark contrast of the self-indulgence and luxury of this room compared with the homely board and benches at the Blythedale farm where she and he had previously lived. The narrator responds to the gorgeousness of both Zenobia and her surroundings by trying to reason against her. In his secret mind, though he later feels she is too powerful, his efforts leave him with a bitter sense of shame. Okay, so I took all that evidence, if you recall from yesterday's video, from the blue part here, with the exception of the bitter sense of shame at the end, because no, I take that back. The bitter sense of shame was in the blue part. It's the part where it says she's too powerful. That part is actually from the red part. But really, I feel like that has to do with him being overwhelmed by her and the surrounding. Okay, and this is what I did. So I took some evidence, and you'll notice I used like 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I used 10 quotes in there, but I would hardly call that 10 pieces of evidence. I have the being where he's there's kind of like 3 different things in here going on. There's the comparison of the two. There's the opulence of the setting, the comparison of the 2 settings, and then his kind of effort to not be overwhelmed. And the failure that he later feels that she is too powerful, right? So those are kind of the 3 things that I talk about, but I use 3 1/3 quotes for each, right? So that's the kind of thing. You'll notice this is a pretty short paragraph. It's 4 sentences. I probably could do some more. I probably could expand a little bit more on how this is leading on to the next thing. But there we have it. In the next 2 paragraphs, I imagine, because they have more to do with his characterization of her, I think would probably be a little bit longer. But there we have it. Okay, so for tomorrow, you go ahead and watch AP video number 23. After that, do some practice on AP Classroom. Mr. Escobar talks about the practice that is listed on AP Classroom and says that the practice FRQs that show up, that they've added, fairly recently in the past month or so, are going to be good examples of the kinds of things that you'll be asked. So take a look at that. And then finally, write the attached essay. Try to limit yourself to 45 minutes. All right? All right. Well, I hope you all have a nice day.